Good afternoon and welcome to Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. Will the committee secretary please call the roll?
DeLong. Gurr. Hanson. Jackson. Karas. Cosma. Marzola. Watts. LaRue Hatch. Oh, I skip over. I'm sorry.
It's quite all right, and as Chair Anderson, I am present as well. If you would please mark Assemblymember Kasama absent excused. I want to welcome everyone to this meeting, those here in Carson City, as well as anyone joining by video conference in Las Vegas or Elko. Hello, one person in Elko. Or those of you listening online. Our agenda for today includes 2 presentations and 2 bill hearings. Before we begin, I would like to make some housekeeping announcements. First, I would like to remind everyone to please silence all your electronic devices while in the committee room. Committee members will be using their laptops to view handouts and other exhibits. Please do not view this as a sign of disrespect or inattention. We expect courtesy and respect in our interactions during the meeting, even if we may not agree with another person's position. If you are presenting or testifying, please sign in at the table by the door and leave a business card with the committee assistant. All exhibits and meeting materials must be submitted electronically to our committee manager by no later than 12 p.m. on the business day before the meeting, and 15 hard copies brought to the meeting for members of the public. Proposed amendments to a bill being heard by the committee must be submitted electronically no later than 12 p.m. on the business day prior to the hearing. Please make sure to include the bill number, a statement of intent, and your name and contact information. When testifying in person, please turn on the microphone. Clearly state and spell your name and the organization or agency you represent, if any, for the record. Please turn off the microphone each time you are done speaking. Public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting. Each person will be limited to 2 minutes. Not a different number that I gave the other day. You may also submit written testimony or public comment in writing up to 24 hours after a hearing. And finally, please note that agenda items may be taken in a different order than listed. 2 or more agenda items may be combined for consideration. An item may be removed from the agenda, or discussion of an item on an agenda may be delayed at any time. With that, we will begin our presentation from the Division of Forestry. If you would like to come to the table. Thank you so much. Please go ahead and introduce yourself when you are ready.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Casey, State Forester Fire Warden for the Nevada Division of Forestry. I wonder if this one would work. I'm going to try that.
Nothing wrong with trying different chairs.
Yeah, let's see if that works. So for those of you who were on the committee earlier, you're going to see a lot of the same slides, but I'm going to change up my jokes and I'm going to try to give you different material so you don't hear exactly the same thing. But I did switch out the pictures. So thank you for having me here today. I'm here to present a little bit on what the Division of Forestry does and on what fire season looked like last year. And my crystal ball isn't working today on what it might look like this season, but we will go through that. First of all, our mission is the protection and enhancement of Nevada's ecosystems and communities through natural resource management and wildland fire management. This is implemented through many different programs. We have urban forestry, we have our FAN program, we have suppression, wildland fire suppression assets, we have dispatch centers, we have prevention and mitigation programs, we protect endangered and protected plants, including yucca, swamp cedar, Christmas tree permits. We've got all kinds of things in our statutes, all in the protection of trees, plants, ecosystems, communities. I should get my notes out. So our 2020, this one's new. our 2024 accomplishments, one of the big ones we're really proud of is our vacancy rates. As we saw some vacancy for a while there, after the Great Resignation, we dropped this year in 1 year from 22 to 13%. The highlight I did want to bring forth, as you know, with AB 236, we did lose a lot of our inmate workers in the camp program, and we were able to actually take 34 positions and make them into 42 firefighter positions. And we are 76% full today in all of those crews. We've been able to hire in every one of those rural locations, and we're building that continuity of knowledge. The positions that still remain vacant are the higher level firefighter twos, where we just haven't seen the qualified applicants in the rural areas yet. But we are building them, and those crews are highly effective. So, our acreage treated this year went down slightly. That's because we have less crews out in the field. But we did have a big bump in the urban forestry assisted residents across the state. It's a big, we heard earlier in the earlier committee from North Las Vegas about free tree giveaways and trying to get trees into parts of Las Vegas. That was a big thing for us. We do currently have 65 Firewise communities across the state. I will go into that a little bit later. This is not anything to be proud about, but we did receive 6 FMAG approved fires this year. So that means we had big fires this year, and they were approved through the FEMA process. We have hit the threshold to be able to qualify for reimbursement. We just have to pay the bills and then get the reimbursement. And we did deliver 269,000 gallons of water this year between our 3 helicopters, our 2 contracted single-engine air tankers, and the scoopers that we also contracted. The 2024 fire season was again below average. Our average is about 450,000 acres a year. We were at 103,000 acres. Bigger than 2023. We did have more starts this year than we had last year, 760. We average about 550 fires per year. Our initial attack success rate was 97%. That means the fires that we were able to hold at like a very small percentage, under an acre, and held within that first 24 hours, we were at 100% last year, but that was not normal. Our average is 95. So, we were still above average. It means we had the response assets that we needed across state, local, and federal governments, and we were able to aggressively attack those fires. We did have a fire this year that is of note to mention. We had the Broom Canyon fire down in Ely area, which was a naturally caused lightning ignition in wilderness. And we have a joint Arc Dome crew with the U.S. Forest Service and NDF. They're a fire use crew, so they were actually out on that fire for almost 80 days, making sure that that fire stayed within its containment lines, and it actually was doing good for the natural resources. And so it was a very exciting opportunity for us this year that we haven't had before. We've never participated with the Forest Service on this type of crew, and it was really exciting to see that work the way that we would have wanted to. We would have wanted to do a prescribed fire in that area, and this was a natural ignition that allowed us to do just that. And for the 4th year running, we have treated more acres across the state, the collective we, the federal, state, and local government, than we have burned. We're over 200,000 acres of treatment. We haven't fully compiled all of those yet. As many of you know who have sat through many of my conversations, the wildfire history in Nevada, we are prone to wildfire every single year. We have wildfire every single year. It just depends on how many and where those starts happen. This is just a graph that shows how wildfires and precipitation work with the drought monitor. So we're continuously looking at fuel moistures, drought monitor, overstocking, we're looking at heat islands, we're looking at everything to understand where and how we might burn. not to scare anyone, but we are in the area where we don't know. I mean, this is what we don't know. If we get a big winter, we haven't gotten a low elevation snowpack yet to pack down last year's grass growth. So I am a little nervous. If we don't get a little more snow up high, I'm also a little nervous. I'm hoping for this storm coming in. Southern Nevada has not seen any rain in a very long time, and that's making me nervous. And so I'm very, very hopeful that this storm actually produces and we see some rain. But it's a little too early to predict. Winter isn't over yet. We all know that. We could have a miracle March and everything could be wonderful. So it's too early to tell what's going to happen. But just to show you the years where it's often confused. It's actually the drier years where we have, that follow the wet years in Nevada that are the most devastating from a fire perspective. This slide was the same as before. Our shared stewardship agreement.
And I'm going to interrupt you really quickly and just let some other people that are in the audience know, or other members of the committee. I believe you presented today to Government
Yes.
Affairs.
Yes.
So that's why there's
Yeah.
been some repeats, and there's a few people that share that committee, just for education for the rest of us. Sorry about that.
Just trying to change it up. So our shared stewardship agreement is one of those landmark agreements that I'm super proud of in my career here with NDF. This has been a lifelong goal of ours to work better and differently with our federal and local government partners. And we did it. We have signed the second agreement. So the first 5 years, we had to first get it up and running. We had to create the structure to make it all work, executive committee, technical advisory committee, and then the working groups on the ground, because that's really where we're going to make the impact. And so we had defined the 13 landscapes. We have 7 of those landscapes stood up as of today with our staff, with people working together, making those 5-year plans of action. Through this partnership, we have, oh, that's interesting. This one, I didn't put in the numbers, but I believe the numbers were like 970 projects. Our acres treated were over 390,000 acres. Over the 5 years in those priority landscapes. We do treat a lot of other areas outside of these landscapes, but this is where we're really targeting our limited resources on getting this work done. We've brought in $117 million of federal investments, and that's pretty major. We've put those on private ground, on state ground, primarily federal ground, but we're primarily federal owned. This year, the total treatment acres, we haven't finalized, but we're looking at 190,000 acres in those 7 landscapes that are stood up, which is 70,000 more acres than we treated last year collectively. So we are doing what we said we were gonna do, which is working and planning differently. In the next 5 years, we wanna continue to increase the acres that we treat, so we kept that acreage total in the next 5-year agreement. We would like to change some of the metrics with which we decide what is good and what is bad. We often use acres treated as the only metric we know. It will probably stay forever. That's an easy one. But we would like to know what impacts we're having in these landscapes from a change perspective, from a habitat perspective. So we're going to try to figure out that. We are going to provide new employees orientation. One thing we did definitely learn this last year, we had a big shift in staff across all of our agencies, federal, state, and local government. Some don't always see the value of working in partnership. It's harder than working by yourself. And so we're going to go around the state and give that leader's intent again, why we're working together, why it's so important to focus our limited assets in the areas that are of highest concern. And our goal is to get all 13 landscapes up and staffed and make sure that all of them are moving toward. So one of the things in the 7 active landscapes, so we've brought in $117 million, which sounds like a lot of money, and we are doing actively treating in 7 of those landscapes. The 5-year plans of work that they have created for those 7 landscapes show about $64 million more of work. The problem with fuels management is it keeps coming back. And so part of it is maintenance and part of it is new treatments. Our wildland fire protection program is the program with which The local governments or local government fire districts or counties can join in. They can opt to join in. There's a buy-in rate based on your risk and the cost to the state of your overall fires. And then we actually use, we pay for all of their fires over, initial attack. This year, we have almost full participation, only 2 small entities that have come out that I think are possibly coming back in. So we're really proud of that. Since the program began sometime back in 2008, we haven't had full participation. So, and it's bigger than just paying fire bills. It's really, we do pay fire bills, so that helps the counties actually budget differently for their fire costs. But beyond that, we actually prioritize mitigation and prevention activities. We have actually donated 6 fire engines this year to participants. It's our goal to make sure that we've provided training to thousands of local government firefighters. It's our goal to make sure that they are trained and equipped and staffed to actually help and assist when we need them on fire. And then earlier I shared our program on Fire Adapted Nevada. Though that position is housed with us, it is actually a program that is an interagency program. All agencies were looking at fire starts. I actually have a chart that shows last year's fires, every reason how that fire started. 65% of them were human caused. And so we're always looking at those areas and trying to target our prevention messages. So we send out interagency prevention teams across the state, trying to make sure that if we're seeing a trend in target shooting fires, then we're actually targeting the messaging to try to say, hey, we need you guys to stay in areas where, vegetation is sparse. We need you to stay in designated shooting areas, all of those types of things. We haven't quite gotten a hold of all of the fires that are human caused yet and how to make that stop. If we could wave that magic wand, we'd have a little less fire in these ecosystems. That's a very brief overview, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
So much, and I see one automatically. Assemblymember DeLong.
Thank you, Chair. Just kind of a follow-up on actually what you talked about this morning. You'd mentioned that there are two agencies that weren't participating. One was North Las Vegas, but what was the other one?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyperson DeLong. It is a case, again, for the record, Casey, it's Boulder City. And so those two are out currently. Their wildland fire risk is fairly low, which would make you not need to participate, but they do want to participate, like I had said earlier, in California response, and so that may be why they come back into this program.
Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. The person with my favorite name in the building, Casey. On slide 5 of the presentation, where you do the breakdown, wildfire causes, 38% natural, 62% human. So we have do kind of a breakdown of that. When you say human, is it, even just a guesstimate, like what percentages are campfire or fireworks, or just trying to understand what the negligence is.
Thank you for the question. Again, for the record, Casey. Yes, I actually have the exact number, but not here and off the top of my head. I do have a list of everything as it's reported. Some of them are unknown. Natural causes, lightning, obviously. There's only one of those. Fireworks were some of those. Target range, illegal campfires. There's a laundry list of why, and I have exact percentages for last year. We break it out every year, so I could send that to you if that would be of value.
Thank you for that. That would be helpful. And then just, again, off the top of your head, on the list, and would it be toward the top, the middle, the bottom? How about off-road? Like sometimes when we go off-road, we worry about, metal to rock or the sparking. Is off-road vehicle much of an issue with either it be the regular four-wheel drive cars or the side-by-sides? I'm just curious how much our off-roading contributes?
Thank you for the question. And again, for the record, Casey, it does contribute, but a lot of the OHV, we've worked very closely with outdoor rec and other industries to make sure that we target the messaging. You know, when you're off-road, they're fairly responsible users. They're usually carrying water and shovels. That's the same with off-road Jeep lovers and everyone who wants to recreate in that direction. Oftentimes what we see is, you know, vehicles that actually end up having to pull over because something happens to the vehicle, and the heat from the undercarriage of the car on grass can start fire. Sparks can happen everywhere. It depends on what you're hitting. So yes, those are in there. The percentage is fairly small.
Thank you. So I have another question as well from your presentation. Oh, wait, are there any other questions? Seeing none, I'm gonna then jump in. I'm sorry, Assemblymember DeLong for the second time.
Thank you, Chair. For the Davis Creek fire and the Callahan fire that followed, whatever, couple weeks later, that small one, were the causes of those fires ever announced?
Thank you for the question. Again, for the record, Casey, 100% the cause was human, but I have not seen the final answer on how on the Davis fire. There was some question on the one that followed. I don't remember the name of that one, whether it was a rekindle or if it was a new start, and I do believe that they determined it was a new start. But I haven't seen the final outcome. I did just check actually, because I'm always curious, and we read those and study them to see how we can help, and I haven't seen that come out yet.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So my other question has to do with slide 9, when you were speaking of the working with other communities. In particular, do you ever work with our tribal communities and or sovereign nations that are around our state? Because they are many times in our most rural areas and are also very accessible to these fire dangers.
Yes, thank you for the question. Again, for the record, Casey. Yes, we do work with the tribes across the state in all areas. Forest health is a big issue in a lot of those areas, the swamp cedar. We have a lot of areas where we're working with the tribal nations here. We're working with them not only with their new crews that they're trying to build, but also with the mill that's just come up and running. One of the big issues for us in getting this wood stock out is we don't have a lot of merchantable timber in the state. So this mill has been a great asset for us to actually get logs into out of our system, not have to leave them for burning in the forest. Our prescribed fire windows are becoming narrower and narrower. Last year, I think I reported to some committee that we actually had we had burned all of our backlogged piles. Well, we've created a bunch of new piles up there, and we're trying to get to them, but our burned windows even this year are very, very sparse. So yes, we do work with the tribes. We actually report that every year by statute on what we do and how we're working with them. And we're always looking for new ways to engage and have them work together with us on those lands.
Thank you so much. And I believe there's another question from Assemblymember Hanson.
Chair, the chair's question kind of had me think of something else. So in that work engagement that you do with the tribes, I just had a meeting yesterday with the council members from the McDermott tribe, which are in my district. Equipment for them is always an issue. So I just want to understand, I think a lot of times they get repurposed equipment that they might be able to acquire. Is that from your agency? And if that's so, what kind of, how often are they able to maybe tap into some inventory that you have that you might be turning over that's still in good working condition that they have access to?
For the question, Assemblymember, again, for the record, Casey. Yes, some of it comes through us. The BLM also has a program, the Federal Excess Property Program with the Forest Service and the Department of Defense. we have first access to a lot of the excess equipment that they're going through for firefighting. So we screen all the time. We ask other departments, what do you need? If we find, fire trucks are very hard to find on there in useful, decent condition. But we have taken every one of them recently. I believe McDermott got 2 from us recently. And so 1 water tender, 1 fire truck, I think is what McDermott got. So we do work very hard to find them. I know that they're not always in the condition in which you'd want. Everyone wants something shiny and new, but we want that too. So we do have a program, a grant program through the U.S. Forest Service where we actually acquire that. There sometimes can be a small cost to us. We don't pass that on to whoever we send it to. And then we try to fix them up to make sure, like if the engine isn't working, if there's parts of it that actually aren't functional, if we have the funding to do that, we will do that before we send it out. And so they have that option. We actually, because of the downsizing of the camp program, are going through an inventory of all of our vehicles right now. And we're gonna have a large excess of crew carriers. And so we've actually, once we get to the point of knowing what we're accessing, we're gonna put those out there to our local government partners first and the tribes and all of our cooperators, and then we'll put them up for auction if nobody needs them. So we do that with our equipment as well. And we do it with radios. All of our radios, when we switched over, went to local government fire districts for utilization. So everything that we have when we're upgrading or they're upgrading, we've found trailers. We look for we screen for all kinds of stuff, so.
Thank you, and thank you for that clarifying question. So if there are no other questions from the board, okay, thank you so much for that information, but you're not off the hot seat yet. No, because we're now going to open up the hearing on AB 86, which revises provisions relating to logging permits. If you would please stay at the table, and I believe you will be joined by Assemblymember Gray. So please begin when you are ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Natural Resources Committee. Today I'm joined by Casey, the state the state forester, as you guys know. We're here to present a very small bill, AB 86, that proposes to make a change in logging and cutting of trees. So
It's always a pleasure to have you back at Natural Resources. Assemblymember Gray, if you'd like to. There you
Assemblyman
go.
Ken Gray, for the record, Kengray. Not used to being on this side, sorry. So I will turn it over to Casey to continue the discussion.
Thank you. And again, for the record, Casey, State Forester Fire Warden for the Nevada Division of Forestry. This is a very easy one. It is simply cleanup language. We're taking out or cutting in one area. This change is needed because back in 2017, we actually changed the definition of logging based on a conversation we were having with the Tahoe Fire Chiefs and a stream zone variance issue where we never intended to actually inhibit landowners from being able to remove fuels in their yard. We were simply for logging operations trying to ensure that we were permitting for logging operations. This or cutting just needs to come out because it doesn't fit the definition of a logging operation as changed in 2017. We also did provide an amendment, a friendly amendment to our own bill, and that's simply to add a definition of cutting operation. It looks very similar to the definition of logging operation. However, it is different. The logging operation has four very specific ways in which you remove them: felling, skidding, fording, yarding. Those are all ways in which you remove the logs for commercial purposes. And again, here we're trying to clarify that we are not trying to stop homeowners from taking limbs off their trees or making, their home defensible space or whatever they're doing. We are really only trying to moderate the people who are selling the logs. So we do provide permits for commercial operations, both in cutting practices and in logging operations. So we're hopeful that this clarifies that for everybody.
Assemblymember you open for questions, or do you have some more information?
Can I just add one little piece, ma'am? Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one part I forgot was that we're bringing this bill on behalf of the Legislative Committee for the review and oversight of the TRPA and the Marlette water system. So this isn't a personal bill, but it's on behalf of the committee. And it is cleanup.
Thank you, because it's always good to see information from the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency to try to get that information together. Seeing some questions from Assemblymember DeLong.
Thank you, Chair. This might end up being a couple of questions. I had a great discussion about this bill with TRPA, and it makes sense to me. I'm just trying to understand how this all fits together. The friendly amendment, is it going to be put into NRS 528.042? It doesn't actually say where it's going to go.
I wish my phone worked. And is my phone a friend Ryan back there? Ryan, you want to come up? I think it goes in the definitions section. And so up at the very top, because it is referenced throughout. So I don't remember off the top of my head if it's, oh, here, Dominique's phone works. 528. It's going to go in 528 at the very beginning. They have their own numbers. So we didn't put a number because those get numbered. Yes.
Then a follow-on to that, if I may, Chair. So by now creating a very specific definition for cutting, it basically says what's happening up in the Tahoe Basin, people basically limbing their trees, getting rid of that low-hanging fuel. It almost is exempt because you've created this new definition. And just, is there a need to remove cutting then from 042 because you created the definition?
Thank you for the question. And again, for the record, Casey, yes, because where it is attached in the specific reference in the first part is under logging operation. And the definition of logging operation takes it out. Where it's referenced in other areas, we felt like it was then confusing because it references cutting operations, which we do still regulate for commercial purposes, but, and nobody's off the hook in the Tahoe Basin. The TRPA still regulates that, and everybody, all of that is still regulated.
Hook and
So
Tahoe,
this was duplicative, but across the rest of the state, we're really only looking to help permit the things that are for commercial purposes.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Great explanation. Next up, Assemblymember Karas.
Okay, it's dead on. Good afternoon, and it's great to hear from you again. I love forestry. My question is this. Well, let me tell you where I'm having a difficulty, and then I'll ask my question. To me, it seems that the definition of logging is exactly the same as the definition of cutting. But it seemed to me the purpose you're trying to do is that cutting would mean it's a private homeowner, basically, or landowner. But in cutting, you still included commercial harvesting by a timber owner or an agent of a timber owner. So how is that different from logging?
Thank you for the question, and again, for the record, Casey. The definition, it's totally like forester dorky language, and I don't have Face ID for Dominique's, but it said in there, cutting, so it is by a commercial operation for felling, skidding, forwarding, yarding, and it's putting it onto a truck and hauling it to a commercial operation. Whereas the difference might be in a cutting practice, I could be a small landowner who is selling my wood to, let's say, the mill down here in Carson, and I don't have the big equipment, but I'm cutting it and I'm just putting it into the back of my truck and hauling it down, but I'm selling it commercially. It still needs to be permitted, so we make sure that we don't have everything cut to the ground or whatever that is, but it's a little bit different in the language, and I don't know if Ryan, if you want to add anything?
Ryan Shane, Deputy Administrator, Nevada Division of Forestry. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, and committee members. I can't add much to it. The key there is loading onto trucks. That's the real change that was made to the definition of logging. And the reason that was done is most of the treatments that are done outside of commercial logging in the basin are done for fuels reduction purposes. A lot of times that material is piled on site and burned, or it's falls under a different set of regulations that doesn't include logging because it's not whole logs going out. I think once you buck that wood up into, say, cordwood, it's like firewood, it doesn't really meet the definition of logging the way it is. And so in the statute that's seeking to be amended, striking cutting practices because, one, it was not defined, could, if somebody really wanted to push on it, start pushing into the realm of private landowners that are doing it for non-commercial purposes. So we sought to do both things at once. Eliminate cutting practices. It's still regulated under a logging permit if it's done commercially, and you can dig into our regs and statutes and find cutting practices listed in those places. So we're not eliminating it entirely from the commercial regulatory environment. However, we are saving the individual landowner from being bogged down in unnecessary permits and things like that to do the right thing for the safety of their home and community.
Yes, you may.
Sorry, I'm just a little confused. I do have a friend that cuts his land clear to sell to logging companies, not in this state, but I'm familiar with the process. But are you trying, because I'm just trying to make sure I understand this correctly, are you trying to make it easier for a homeowner to clear their land of fire potential debris, but then they're also allowed to sell it to commercial ventures?
Thank you for the question, and again, for the record, Casey, I think I don't think, I know what we're trying to do. We're trying to clarify what when we updated the logging definition, it bumped out cutting practices. So at the time, in that one sentence, but not in the statute at whole. And so yes, we're trying to clarify that we're not trying to regulate homeowners who are trying to reduce their fire risk and not selling it commercially. But if they're selling it commercially, then we just need to permit it, and that's by the regs as it stands. So, but this kind of clarifies, well, we thought it did, maybe it doesn't, but to us, it did clarify the language, so that it wasn't confusing that because logging and cutting, as it's stated, the definitions don't match.
Thank you, and thank you for that question, because sometimes the different statutes sometimes feel like they're the exact same. So having that very clarification was very kind. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much. At this time, then, we will move on to testimony on AB 86. As a reminder, please remember to clearly state and spell your name for the record. You will testify in support if you support the bill in its entirety. You will testify in opposition if you oppose anything in the bill, even if it's just one small thing, but you agree with the rest. And testimony in neutral is not taking a position. It is just providing us with information. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. And for those calling in, you can find the call-in information on the agenda. Also, just a reminder, we ask that you avoid repeating testimony made by a previous speaker, and please feel free to say ditto on something similar. A title testimony in support, opposition, or neutral will be limited to 20 minutes each. Don't think we will have that much, but you never know. So we'll begin testimony in support of AB 86, starting in Carson City. Seeing no one come to the desk, and now seeing Elko being dark. Anybody in Las Vegas? Seeing nobody coming to the desk in Las Vegas. AVH, is there anyone who would like to testify in support of AB 86 over the phone?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Next, we will hear testimony in opposition of this bill. Is there anyone wishing to testify in opposition here in Carson City? Las Vegas? And AVH, is there anyone who would like to testify in opposition of AB 86 over the phone?
Chair, the public line is open and working. There are still no callers at this time.
Is there anyone wishing to testify who's neutral on AB 86 here in Carson and Las Vegas? And, you know, AVH, you already told me that nobody's on the phone, so I'm just going to kind of skip you this time. Seeing nobody come to the microphone, that concludes our testimony on this bill. Assemblymember Gray, would you like to make any closing remarks?
Ken Gray for the record. Madam Chair, thank you so much for letting us present this today. And a little rusty, this is the first bill I presented since last session, but thank you guys so much, committee members, and look forward to hearing where you guys want to go with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Gray. All right, we'll move to our second presentation from DWR. Thank you for joining us today, and please go ahead and introduce yourself for the record. Feels weird not saying their name at the same time. I'd rather have them say it. Does that make sense?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Adam Sullivan. I'm the state engineer and the principal administrator of the Division of Water Resources. Often people say that I have one of the hardest jobs around, and my thought is, well, you haven't met Casey. Our emergencies in water tend to be really slow moving. It's nothing like responding to wildfire. And so with this presentation, there's a number of things with water law that are very confusing, contentious. There's things I'm going to breeze over that we could spend hours talking about. So I really want to take this time to focus on, first, a very brief overview of the division, and then to talk about more of the bigger issues that we face with water resources in Nevada, and some things to think about when water bills come before us. And I'm just being honest about my thoughts there, about how I approach bills. And I think it's important to spend some time thinking about it. So water is not an easy subject, but here are some quick facts as starters. We are the driest state in the nation. We're also the state with the most individual mountain ranges, which I like that fact. Water supply, most of our water it comes from surface water sources. This includes our major municipal areas, which are river-fed, and our large irrigation districts. About a third of our groundwater supply water supply is from groundwater. Across the board, roughly speaking, from all sources, water use is mostly used for irrigation, about 70%, and then about 10% each for municipal supply and for mining. That's pretty typical across western states, but just to give you a sense. And on the next slide, I'll have some more precise information about measured groundwater use in the state. We're still among the fastest growing states. The water law that guides us, there's a lot of history over the generations. It's the same fundamental principles that apply in all semi-arid western states. And with water rights, in Nevada, the amount that's already appropriated across most of the state exceeds the amount that we project would be sustainable over a long period of time. So I'll talk more about that and what that means. So this slide is for your information about how groundwater is used around the state. The dark blue bars represent actual use by the manner of use, which is on the x-axis, and then the faded bars are the amount that's appropriated for each one of those manners of use, which is a lot more than what's actually used. This is for 2021, which is the most recent year where our staff have put together a really comprehensive water use assessment or inventory statewide. About 67% of groundwater is for irrigation, about 8 to 10% for mining and for municipal, and much lesser amounts for other manners of use, which is similar to the numbers that I put up on the previous slide. And so what one of the points here is that existing rights to use water are about double of what is actually used for all manners of use. And some of that is because people are really efficient, they don't use the full amount that you have, available to you. In other cases, that really represents water rights that are not actively in use at all. So the scope and responsibility of the Division of Water Resources is we implement or carry out Nevada water law using the best available science to protect the resource and then to support and protect Nevada's water users. The history of water law goes back generations. Our office was formed or created in 1903. The principal reasons for our office to be created were, one, to determine the validity of water rights that were already in use at that time, because basically all surface water was already being used in 1903, and then secondly, to come up with a methodology to appropriate new groundwater rights. So that was the scope at the time. Groundwater was added into statute in 1939. There really wasn't much groundwater in use prior to that, and while technology advanced more in the the 30s and into World War II. And so groundwater appropriations are subject to the same basic principles as appropriating surface water, all sources. The jurisdiction of our office is for all sources of water within the state, whether above ground or below ground, except for the Colorado River. And that's important to note. There's a separate state agency, the Colorado River Commission, which has jurisdiction over the Colorado River, and really the negotiations on behalf of Nevada on interstate issues with Colorado River are overseen by the Southern Nevada Water Authority. Water rights is primarily what our office does. Water rights within the state are processed through and documented by our office. And there's a simple basic criteria that all water rights are evaluated on. That is is water available? Would its use potentially conflict with existing rights? And is it in the public interest? So those are the basic criteria that any application that comes before us are evaluated by. So there's other duties that our office oversees. This includes, we're still determining pre-statutory rights, those for surface water, those that were in use prior to 1905. We keep records of use, well drilling, dam safety. We also distribute water, surface water in accordance with decreed rights, and more. So these are essential services. Every facet of Nevada's future is really dependent on effective administration of the public water resource. Economic development requires water. Public health, housing requires water. Protecting the natural environment requires water. As a division, our scope is really defined by what's in water law. So there's some built-in constraints or a defined role for us, but we work cooperatively with a number of other public agencies, such as large municipalities or irrigation districts who have sort of different kinds of authority or responsibility over the use of the public resource. So again, everything that our office does is governed by water law, and here's some basic principles that are just an important foundation. First, the prior appropriation doctrine, commonly called first in time, first in right. So if one water use was established first and it was continually in use, then it has a priority over any other use that was initiated later. The priority date of any water right is an important component of that water right because it really defines the relative seniority with other rights. Secondly, beneficial use. This is the basis, the measure, and the limit to the right to use water. That's right out of statute. And everything, really a lot of the primary steps that we go through in evaluating water rights and determining if to approve or deny them, and then maintaining good standing of a water right is tied to beneficial use. And then third, the principle of use it or lose it. If there's no need for the water, then the right to divert it ceases. And that's another line that's straight out of statute. Unused water rights can't be held without reasonable diligence toward beneficial use. Who owns the water? All water within the state's boundaries, whether on the surface or underground, is owned by the public. A water right is the right to use that public resource when it's available and when you're in priority. It's a usufructory right. So water rights also have an important private property aspect. They can be bought or sold or moved around by the private holders, but nobody actually owns the water itself. And lastly, this is a principle that water rights are tied to a property and transfer to a buyer when a property is sold, unless it's specifically excluded or reserved in a deed. Okay, so those are some of the basic foundational things to understand. This slide is about key challenges in water resource management. So increasingly, or there are increasing demands for water supply to satisfy growth. This is statewide. We have needs for water. All the things that we want to do generally require some element of a water supply, and there's often not enough to go around. Secondly, we have a legacy of existing appropriations exceeding the long-term supply. Now, in some areas, we do see steadily declining water levels and impacts on streams and springs due to overuse. In other areas, it may be out of balance on paper, but we wouldn't see those kinds of impacts for a really, really long time. So the issues in water rights or water administration tend to be really localized. The local conditions are important in how we address these. Preventing conflict with existing rights, protecting existing users is paramount in what we do and our responsibility as a division. And when I say conflict here, what I'm talking about is one water user's use of the water inhibiting another's access or use of the water on a priority basis. Deviation from the foundational principles of water law. So there has been a trend, as I see it, been a trend in the modern era to sort of to drift this direction, to add new exceptions, special cases or considerations to protect different interests, and it's understandable, but cumulatively the impact on our agency is little special rules and exceptions slow down what we do. And there's also potential for introducing errors or the assertion or perception that we're being capricious in our administration. And in my experience, the clearest example is dealing with this issue of unused water rights, and at what point should they be coming off the books? There's an expectation that we do it. It's a foundational principle of administering water law, but there's a lot of protection built in to support that private property interest in a water right. So the reality is that water rights rarely go away. Much less than is commonly perceived that happens through forfeiture or cancellation. So the downside of that is, like, the purpose of going through the forfeiture process is really to protect those who are actually using the resource or who have the immediate need. So it has an upside, So the downside of protecting the private property interest is that you can have a negative impact on those who are there in the area actually using water or having that need. So there's different angles and different sort of valid perspectives on that. And lastly, insufficient updated data to determine water availability. That is true. That's one of the challenges that we face. However, there is a lot of good work that's happening now to update that baseline data. In fact, there will be an event on March 27th on second floor atrium about water, and one of the features is the Nevada Water Initiative, which is an effort that is addressing this specific concern, and this is something we really need as an agency, so I'm excited to support that. But a lot of the baseline science that we rely on is 50 to 70 years old. It doesn't have the benefit, it hasn't been updated with the kind of data and information that we've been able to collect since then. So there's good progress on that, but more to be done. So implementation of Nevada water law, and here what I'm talking about is how our division operates, what we do, and how decisions get made. There's a well-defined procedure in statute for how an application is received, how the public is noticed, the process that we go through, the timelines that we follow. Water law is very effective for that procedure. This is the day-to-day work that we do. We process about 1,000 applications every year. We have an excellent staff who have the training to do this, who are able to look at this and treat all applications the same, and recognize that the facts for each application may be different, but that process of evaluation is the same. And it's really important to maintain that integrity. So there's a whole second element of what we do, and this is the second part of this slide, which is addressing these long-term issues of water being over-appropriated, and having common agreement on how to address that. In addition, protecting environmental resources is something from the public viewpoint is very important. Water law is not very prescriptive about how to accomplish those objectives. What our office is doing to at least prepare us to be a high-functioning state agency into the future, to be ready to be part of the solution for these challenges, is a lot of public outreach, communication about the science, updating the science, digitizing our records. We have hundreds of thousands of paper records, of which there's only one copy of in our office. And we're slowly going through the process of digitizing and cataloging, indexing all that to make it publicly available and to preserve those records. And at the same time, building up a new staff and cross-training staff so that we can address the loss of institutional knowledge. In the last session, we got 10 new positions, which was huge for us. And we've been able to fill those positions. We have a vacancy rate that's less than 10%. But water rights and administration of water law, it takes a long time to learn and be good at. So although we've been able to work on our backlog, this is an investment. Those 10 new positions will really help us into the future, keep up with our workload. So these challenges, these are long-term challenges that took decades to develop. There's no quick fix, so we do need to proceed cautiously. And with my last slide, so every time there's a water bill, there's a certain way that I look at bills or from a neutral perspective, but the person who's responsible for implementing any potential new law, this is kind of how I go through the sequence of what this would mean for our agency and for water resources. And anytime I testify on a water bill, this is kind of where I'm coming from. So first, alignment with Nevada water law. Does a proposal, is it consistent with the foundational principles? That's the first important consideration. Secondly, protecting the resource. Does it really protect the aquifer? does it protect existing users? Scope and potential precedent. Is a proposal a narrow fix for a local problem? Are we creating a new exception? Or a new deviation or a special rule? And what might be the unintended consequences if it might make sense, great sense in one area, but have unintended consequences elsewhere? Fourth, the root cause. Trying to understand what the root, what the issue is, and potentially if there's an alternative way that we could solve it. And lastly, the impact on the administrative process with regard to our workload and our ability to absorb new initiatives, what the impacts on our efficiency or any costs that might be associated with that. So again, from my perspective, if a proposed bill does not meet these standards, I will try to articulate why that is. And with that, I will conclude and take any questions.
About the microphone. Thank you so much, Mr. Sullivan. You did a great job, and I think we can totally see how much you love that water information. I'm not gonna lie to you, there are times I'm like, oh, what? Okay, got it. But really appreciate all that information. We do have a few questions. I'm gonna start off with Assemblymember DeLong.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. A lot of good information in it. With regards to the digitization of all of that data, what's happening to the hard copies once they've been put into the database?
Thank you for the question, Adam Sullivan, for the record. That's a great question because we've struggled that with ourselves. At this point, we have not gotten rid of anything. We have scanned over 60,000 Mylar maps of water rights, and we have put the maps into storage. So we're operating with the digital version, and we're really testing to see, is this satisfying our needs? Is this meeting the public interest? And before we do anything about getting rid of those maps. But over time, that's a storage consideration. So we're actively thinking, what are we going to do in the long term, and what needs to be kept? Some of it goes to archives because the really old stuff has historic significance. But more recent records, digital copies are just fine.
Brought up the concept of digital records, and so what about filing applications digitally rather than having to submit hard copies? How is the division moving towards that approach?
Another great question, Adam Sullivan, for the record. So we're incrementally introducing new options for digital submittals or payments online. So we can take extensions of time digitally. Maps, water right maps can now be submitted digitally, which is huge. You don't need to submit a big 3-foot Mylar sheet. Claims of vested right can be submitted digitally. We're not to the point yet of accepting applications online or other payments besides extensions of time, but we're actively working on that because we know it provides a lot of benefit to the public, especially people who live in rural parts of the state that would otherwise have to drive into Carson City to make a payment or make a submittal.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Considine.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about aquifer. As it, interplays with rain. Is there a way to quantify, I'm assuming there's a ton of different things that would be involved in that, the amount of time it would take and the amount to percolate down to the aquifer, or is it just measuring the water in the aquifer at the time that you measure it?
Adam Sullivan, for the record. The way that we operate is understanding the water budget. And to do that, there's different elements of the water budget that can be measured, that can tell us about how much water is fluxing through a certain area, and how much then would be determined to be available to be diverted and beneficially used. So precipitation, measuring precipitation is one element of that. The amount of recharge, how much of that precipitation actually makes it down, percolates down into the aquifer. There's ways of measuring that. And then how much just naturally discharges, either through spring flow, base flow in streams, or through plants that tap into the water table. So understanding that whole water budget is foundational to what the statutory standard is of determining if is water available. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you. Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. On slide 7, under key challenges in water resource management, one of the last things mentioned was insufficient updated data to determine water availability. Can you maybe, if you had a magic wand, well, let me say it this way. What's causing that, to have insufficient updated data, number one? And if you had a magic wand, how would you fix it?
Adam Sullivan for the record. When Nevada adopted the groundwater statutes in 1939, they were, the people who were working on this question were very much ahead of their time. They realized that with surface water, you could tell how much water is available. It's either there or it's not. But when we start appropriating groundwater, how do you determine how far we can go? And how long will these commitments last? So they initiated a series of studies over the following 30 years, which were primarily at a reconnaissance level of understanding what the water budget is, getting back to Assemblymember Considine's question. And that science that was done with very little data in the 1940s through 1970s or so is still primarily what, across most of the state, that's what we base our determinations on. So that's where so insufficient data. So we have learned since then with, as water is developed, what the impacts are. We have additional data to amend that baseline understanding of water availability. And we also have improved techniques, we have computing power, we have the expertise in Nevada to really answer that question and kind of set us up, just like we did in the 1940s through the 1970s. If we can make that investment now, we'll be setting ourselves up for 50 to 100 years into the future.
So I'm guessing money. That money's the issue, and that to do some of this technology.
Adam Sullivan for the record. Yes, it takes money, but I would point out that it has a very high return on investment.
Luckily, that's in a different committee. So we're going to talk about the policy itself. Assemblymember Karas, and thank you for that answer. Assemblymember Karas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question, because a number of us took a tour at the Desert Research Institute just last week. We were made aware that most studies are 50 years or older on water, but there is emerging data that's coming forth. Are you aware of that? Are you in any way in partnership with DRI?
Adam Sullivan, for the record, absolutely. We're cooperating with DRI and also the USGS Nevada Water Science Center. There's a very common vision for what we need to do and where we need to go. So I appreciate you taking that tour and thinking about it. And this is some of the information that will be on March 27th, the event that I mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Vice Chair LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for being here. I wondered if you could just speak a little bit about the difference between a basin that is over-appropriated and one that is over-pumped, and maybe some on-the-ground examples of what that looks like in our state currently.
Sullivan, for the record. So for some context, the way that we administer groundwater rights is at the basin scale. So topographically, Nevada is conveniently, most of the state can be mapped out into topographic basins. And historically, you know, when the water development for irrigation was happening in the basin fill in the middle of the valley, and we came up with a way for administering water rights that recognized that. So we come up with an estimate of water availability in a basin, and have the allowance that you can move water rights within that basin, but not from one basin to another. So in a lot of places that works pretty well, because we have kind of a hydrologically contained system. But there's a lot of the state where we have administratively delineated basins, but the groundwater flow is actually connected from one basin to another, or that boundary isn't really a topographic boundary, it's just a convenient boundary. So there's a number of different exceptions. But when we talk about, so the concept of a basin is helpful, but it's not there's some other considerations when we talk about conflicts and water availability. The idea of being over appropriated or over pumped refers to the perennial yield, which is our estimate representing the water budget. And what's commonly said is if the pumping or the appropriations exceed the perennial yield, then that's what defines over appropriation or over pumped. And again, generally that's a pretty good rule of thumb, and it's pretty informative. In a lot of places, the perennial yield is very, very small compared to a really large basin that has vast quantities of water in storage. So with regard to potential conflict among water rights, the perennial yield isn't the best guideline. But maybe circling back to more what your question was, about half of the administrative basins across the state are over appropriated, just by that measure. And roughly half of those then are over pumped. It's a good indicator of where the problems are now, or where we're likely to get them in the near future. But it's not the only aspect of the larger question of preventing conflict in the long term.
Thank you. So I just have one more question, unless there's anybody else who would like to ask a question. Okay. My question has to do with the water rights, and I don't know if this would be through you or through someone else. As an elected official, or in this case, in charge of water rights, do you have to report if you have any water rights because of how important they are for so many parts of our water livelihood? So if you have water rights, do you ever have to report that through an ethics measure of any sort? Or do you know of anybody that does need to report that if they are elected officials?
Adam Sullivan, for the record. I've never had that question. I do not own any water rights, and actually I take great pride in the ability for our agency to be a neutral arbiter with no vested interest in the outcome of our decisions. I think that's a critical sort of foundation for our agency. There's a provision in statute that the state engineer cannot have other employment that would in any way conflict with what the responsibilities of the state engineer are. And I think as a matter of practice, it would be important to know if I did own any personal water rights, but no, that's not an issue.
I understand it was a little bit out there, so I appreciate the honesty and candor with it. But you are a neutral group, and so if there's ever decisions made about a water rights issue, it would come through you as the water engineer. And since you do not own water rights, you have nothing to do with those sort of decisions. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Or it would not help you. Thank you so much. And since there are no other questions, we're You're not off the hot seat yet, though, because now we're actually going to open up the hearing for AB 26, which revises provisions related to dams. If anybody's joining you, if they would please come on up. I do want to take a moment to really quickly introduce my uncle, who's actually in the room, who is a dam water engineer and has been the joke of more than a few comments during Thanksgiving regarding that. So I'm very excited that Uncle Ross is here for that. Uncle Ross is now the incredibly embarrassed person in the middle. But so whenever you are ready, if you would like to begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Adam Sullivan, the State Engineer and Administrator of the Division of Water Resources. I will try to speak up. And I am here to present Assembly Bill 26, which proposes to update Chapter 535 of the NRS, which governs dams and other obstructions. So these statutes were first established in 1951, which makes Nevada one of the first Western states to adopt dam safety laws to ensure oversight of these critical structures. The need for this bill originated from our dam safety staff, who've noted several things in the chapter that aren't consistent with standards in the industry and with modern practice. So the intent is to address that. There's nothing in AB 26 that is intended to give any new authority or any exceptions either to dam owners or to the division that differ from current practice. And for some context for the dam safety program, I'd like to start with a little bit of overview of the program. And we also have other managing staff for the program if you have questions about how we operate. So first, there are 658 dams in the state of Nevada that are subject to the division's regulatory oversight, and they're categorized by hazard level: high, significant, and low. There's 154 high hazard dams, meaning that dam failure would likely result in the loss of life. There are 88 significant hazard dams, meaning failure could cause extensive economic loss or a disruption of essential infrastructure. And there are 416 low hazard dams, meaning failure poses a low probability of causing economic loss or disruption. So one of the division's primary responsibilities is conducting visual inspections of these dams. There are 5 staff members in the group. Each year they inspect between 200 and 300 dams. And additionally, they review about 15 to 20 applications for new dams or modifications to existing dams. So another objective of the program is for all high and significant hazard dams to have an emergency action plan. And this is a critical document that helps local emergency responders and the state staff to have the right contacts in place and be prepared to respond to dam failure or threats of dam failure. Anything that would pose a risk to the community. So the division provides the regulatory oversight, and then the dam owners are responsible for the maintenance and operation of the dam. There's one exception where the division is the regulator, and we are also the owner and the operator of a dam, and this is the South Fork Dam in Elko County near Spring Creek. So while this is a policy committee, it's also important to talk a little bit about the funding structure, because that really governs what the capacity of the program is. The program is primarily funded by an annual state assistance grant through FEMA, the FEMA National Dam Safety Program. It covers all inspections, emergency preparedness, public outreach, technical training for our staff, nearly everything except for staff salaries, which is covered by general fund. So in addition, the division collects about $1.4 million in dam storage fees. And it's only from non-agricultural dams across the state. And this is a fee that originated in 1989. And there was a lot of interest in having the programs be self-funded. But what's happening is that money is routed directly into, currently it's routed directly into the general fund. So this is an area where the division is interested in potentially just restructuring this revenue source to directly support dam safety issues, which was the original intent. And that's, for example, I'm talking about funding opportunities for dam owners, private dam owners who are maintaining these critical structures that have public safety implications, or to do statewide, really in-depth engineering risk assessments, especially on high hazard dams. This is not an issue that we're pursuing in this session, but it could have a real substantial impact on improving dam safety statewide. Any future changes to that would really have to be carefully considered, but ultimately the goal is having public safety with aging infrastructure. So now I'd like to walk through specifically the provisions of AB 26. Section 1 provides liability protections for division staff. Ensures that staff are not held liable as a result of dam inspections, emergency response, or other actions taken to protect the public. This is in alignment with national dam safety recommendations from the Association of Dam Safety Officials and from FEMA. It's also intended to be consistent with protections that are already provided in NRS Chapter 41 for staff who are just doing their job. But the intent here is to be specific to dam safety work. Now we understand that there was some concern about this Section 1 and perhaps going further than what is provided in Chapter 41, especially with the idea of agents hired by the state engineer doing work also protected. So there's an easy fix to this. We can remove the or authorized agents, those three words which appear twice in that paragraph. And my understanding is that removes the concern that's been brought up about this Section 1. Section 2 clarifies what constitutes regulatory oversight. So this aligns with current industry standards and current practice. Section 2, subsection 1 removes the requirement for a water right to classify a dam. Recognize that many dams are flood control structures that don't divert water or even store water for any substantial time. And this section also clarifies that all dams must receive approval from the division prior to construction, reconstruction, or alteration, again, consistent with current practice. Section 2, subsection 2 clarifies that if a dam does not meet standard height or capacity thresholds, it can still be classified as jurisdictional if it's deemed to be high or significant hazard. So an example of this is dams that are in series, where they're individually, each one is very small, it doesn't meet that critical threshold, but if they were to fail in series, which can happen in a flood event, then it would represent a high or significant hazard. So that's an example of what we envision here. Subsection 2 also removes the requirement to submit plans in triplicate because we can accept digital submittals. And also the criteria for submitting plan 30 days before construction, because that is just not a realistic time frame for plan review for critical infrastructure. Section 2, sub 3, 4, and 5 are all conforming language. Section 2, subsection 6 clarifies that dams under the regulatory oversight of the Bureau of Reclamation or the Army Corps of Engineers are exempt from state oversight. The previous language referenced dams constructed by these agencies, but some of these facilities are transferred. They're built by the Bureau of Reclamation and then transferred to local entities. For instance, this is exactly what happened with Rye Patch Dam on the Humboldt River, where the dam was built by the Bureau of Reclamation, transferred to Pershing County Water Conservation District, and then at that point the dam had no formal regulatory oversight, and we found a way for the state to adopt that. But this change would ensure that when federal oversight or regulatory oversight ends, then it would transfer to the state. So we have a continuity in service. These modifications were made to reflect current dam safety practices in Nevada and to better align with the National Dam Safety Program guidelines. Okay, Section 3. This makes minor modifications to clarify communication between the Nevada Department of Wildlife and the division. These changes reflect discussions with NDOW staff and update the statute to align with current interagency practices. Section 4 includes a minor modification to align with Section 2. Section 5 clarifies language regarding land access for dam inspections. Inspections that our staff conduct may extend immediately upstream or downstream of the structure itself. And when there's parcel lines that are immediately adjacent to a structure, or as land development increases around dams, access is needed to be able to complete these safety inspections. So if there's concerns with landowners, we can reach out and notify people that we're going to be there, and that's done on a case-by-case basis. Section 6, subsection 1 makes modifications to reflect that dams are not always built within a stream channel or a water course, and again, not all dams require a vested claim or water right. Section 6, sub 3 removes the requirement to formally serve notice to a dam owner or person controlling the dam through a process server, while the division will still notify in writing. Eliminating the formal service requirement really just streamlines the process. And subsection 4 adds clarity about what removal refers to. Section 7 removes the requirement to formally serve notice, again, to dam owners through a process server regarding the removal of beaver dams. Section 8 and 9 replace the term permit with the term approval, and that aligns with changes in Section 2. Dam owners must receive approval from the division prior to conducting work. While not all dams require a permit, particularly those considered non-jurisdictional, division notification and approval are still required, so this is conforming. So overall, these changes strengthen regulatory clarity, enhances public safety, and ensures consistency with current dam management practices in Nevada. And that concludes my remarks, and I stand for any questions.
Very thorough. Really appreciate that. So first we'll start off with any questions, and why, I'm gonna mix it up. Assemblymember Hanson this time.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm glad I get to follow up with Section 7. It's like hilarious. Nevada beaver get their entire section. And they have, now the owners have to be, they can be served, what was the word? We provide notice instead of serve. So anyway, sorry, I just find that funny. And needed. So thank you for coming in and specifying a lot of this and clarifying for me. I mainly just wanted to get on the record that Nevada beaver have an entire section in this bill. And there was one, you did cite on Section 1 with the liability or the immunity protection for staff, right? State Engineer's Office. You cited that in Chapter 41, it provides immunity already in statute. I might have just missed it. We already have immunity for certain workers. In Chapter 41, I didn't pull it up. You just elaborate. You're just asking for immunity in regards to this work, but it's no different than immunity we give in regards to what in 41.
Thank you for the question. Adam Sullivan for the record, yes, there is some protections provided in chapter 41. It's a little bit hard to read. My understanding is that what we're proposing here is compatible with chapter 41, but our intent is to be specific to actions by our staff regarding dam safety actions, because we are potentially in some hazardous situations.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that it's not unusual to provide immunity, and this seems a very reasonable ask. So thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. What type of consequence will be for the landowner if they don't comply with the authority that inspects them?
Adam Sullivan for the record. So any owner of a dam is responsible for maintenance and operation of that facility. That is implicit in the ownership of that structure. This is not something that we have had much enforcement responsibility for, but the division has the authority, if there's an unsafe condition with the dam, to release the water from that reservoir to protect the public. So that would be probably the immediate authority to on our part. And worst case is that a really unsafe dam could be breached, and the expenses for that would be upon the owner.
Thank you so much. Assemblymember DeLong.
Chair, I have a couple questions and a point of clarification. On section 1, you had mentioned the potential of removing or authorized agent in 2 locations in that text. Is that a proposed amendment, or is that just a point of discussion at this point?
Thank you for the question, Adam Sullivan for the record. I'm not exactly sure what the process is. I notified the chair and the
Yeah. Okay.
meeting just to notify in my intent. There's a couple of ways this could be done, but just removing those 3 words in 2 places is a friendly amendment.
Did anticipate one of my questions, which is the one dam that the division does own and manage, which is South Fork. How do you internally deal with the fact that you're the owner, but you're also the regulator? And how do you ensure transparency and the fact that it is actually being done to protect the public?
Adam Sullivan for the record, it's awkward. We wear different hats. We might be on the one side of the office to the other, but we apply for our own permit to alter a dam. And we take pride in having a high standard to being a model dam owner and doing the right thing to maintain safety of that structure.
You have different people doing the different jobs. People that operate it aren't the ones that regulate it.
Yes, that's correct.
I do have, a question. In section 2 and section 4, you talk about some federal agencies that have jurisdiction on dams in the state, and you carved out, essentially, sounds like an exemption for them, since they're regulating it, the state doesn't. And I'm just wondering why FERC wasn't included in that.
Adam Sullivan for the record. Yes, the idea is that the Bureau of Reclamation and the Army Corps own dams and operate dams, and they have their own inspection protocol, so that state inspection would be unnecessary or redundant. FERC is another potential exemption there, as well as the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the tribes that own and operate and have federal jurisdiction within their dam, for their.
So those could be added in this section through an amendment? Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe you guys can work maybe offline on a
Yep.
possible amendment, possibly if that is possible. Next up would be Assemblymember Watts.
Thank you, Chair. I think some of my questions were asked. Seems like, I think, just for a point of clarification, yeah, we'll want to see something in writing looking at what the potential amendment is. I guess following up on my colleague's question about the agencies, I can see that, for example, in Section 2, subsection 7, I guess it's now going to be subsection 6. It mentions these agencies, and it's changed from constructed by to under the jurisdiction of. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on exactly what the jurisdiction is. Like, for example, is it permitting? I think a lot of what I've heard is that these are actively managed by these entities, not, for example, like private projects that are permitted by some of these agencies. But if you could just give me a little bit more clarity on that.
Adam Sullivan, for the record. Yes, the reason these two are already in statute is that reason. They own dams, they operate them, they have there's the federal regulatory oversight. Can be somewhat different than other agencies, and FERC is a good example. They have a very, the federal standards for dam inspections, as a general rule, are as good or more or better than the state standards. So there's not a compromise in the quality of the inspection. One consideration about FERC is they're not located within the state. So if there was an exemption for a FERC regulated dam, that would have to be understood that in the event of an emergency, our state agency might not have any capacity to be responsive to that. So there's a public safety element there. But as far as the integrity of that periodic inspections, there's a high standard there.
Thank you so much for that answer. And Assemblymember Karas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just need a little clarification on section 1. I think I'm confused, so set me straight. Tell me, is the state engineer is immune to liability if a design or an approved design is faulty? Because I'm concerned for the public if a design gets approved and the dam fails. Is section 1 saying that the state engineer is not held accountable, or is it only dealing with an emergency response or inspection?
Adam Sullivan, for the record, this is explicitly for inspection, emergency response, or enforcement of an order or regulation by the state engineer. When a dam is designed, the engineer of record is not the state engineer. We do a review of the design plans, but the engineering stamp on that plans is a design engineer. We don't actually stamp the plans. We do our best to do an engineering review of those plans, and we'll provide comments to the design engineer, but our threshold is to make a determination if that design meets statute and regulations, and to have a good dialogue with the design engineers so that we do have really safe structures. But we are not the design engineers, so I would say that this isn't trying to add some new protection that's not already in part of common practice, standard practice.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and I know that gets a little bit complicated at times, and so I think that there's also been some other groups that have come in with different questions and everything like that, so looking forward to a little bit more conversations. However, are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. I think what we'll do next is we'll move into, we'll now begin testimony on AB 26. We'll start the same way. Starting off with testimony and support. Is there anybody here in Carson City who would like to voice their support of AB 26? Seeing nobody coming. Anyone in Las Vegas? Seeing nobody. How about online? Is there anybody testifying in support on AVH?
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 26, please press star 9 on your phone to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers available to testify in support at this time.
Thank you. Next, we will hear testimony in opposition of the bill. Is there anyone here in Carson City who would like to testify in opposition of AB 26? Seeing no one, how about in Las Vegas or on AVH?
To testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 26, please press star 9 on your phone to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers testifying in opposition at this time.
Thank you. Is there anyone who's wishing to testify in neutral, either here in Carson, in Las Vegas, or in AVH?
To testify in neutral to Assembly Bill 26, please press star 9 on your phone to take your place in the queue.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this is Kyle Roerink, Executive Director of the Great Basin Water Network. I'm sorry I can't be there in person today. We represent water users and community members throughout White Pine County, Nevada, as well as many other counties in the state. And we are in neutral right now, but we just wanted to state that any move to add language about FERC would be very problematic and is likely a move about a very controversial project going on right now in White Pine County that is going through FERC permitting and has a number of issues. There are public officials at many levels in the county who would also be very concerned about any language dealing with FERC getting into the bill. So thank you very much for your time, and please consider my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please spell your name again? He's probably off the phone, but I believe we can find it pretty easily. During that time,
The spelling is KYLEROERINK. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any other callers?
Chair, there are no more callers testifying in neutral at this time.
Thank you. It appears we've got somebody that did come up to the table here in Carson. You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Olivia Tanager, Director of the Sierra Club's Toyabe chapter. For the record, I just wanted to echo what Mr. Roerink said and state that we are in neutral with the bill as presently written, but should an amendment be forthcoming, that might change our stance. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to testify in opposition? Seeing none, would you like to make any closing comments?
Adam Sullivan, for the record. I appreciate the time that this committee has given to considering this bill. And I'll just emphasize that with regard to section 1, that really the intent here is, it does not create any new protections, and it's just clarifying for this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I will close the hearing on AB 26. And now we'll go for our last thing on our agenda. We will start with public comment. As a reminder, members of the public can provide public comment in person, by phone, or submit written public comment to the committee's email up to 24 hours after this meeting. Instructions for providing public comment can be found on the agenda, including the call-in information. Public comment will be limited to 2 minutes per speaker. Staff will time each speaker during public comment to ensure everyone has a fair opportunity to speak. We also ask that you do not repeat what a previous commentator has stated. Please remember to clearly state and spell your name, and we'll begin with public comment from those in the physical locations and then move to anyone who has called in. Is there anyone in Carson City who would like to provide public comment? Seeing none, is there anyone in Las Vegas who would like to provide public comment? Seeing none, is there anyone in Elko? I'm not even gonna try Elko. Is there anybody on AVH who would like to make public comment via telephone?
Chair, there are no callers at this time.
All right, thank you, everyone, for your meeting today. This concludes our meeting. Our next meeting will be on Monday, February 17th at 4 p.m. The meeting is adjourned.